All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, as we've been discussing, after having called on negotiators to get a stimulus done over the weekend from his suite at Walter Reed, President Trump officially pulled the plug on stimulus negotiations in a stunning move that is both catastrophic for him politically and absolutely devastating for millions of Americans. So here's his tweet. Nancy Pelosi is asking for $2.4 trillion to bail out poorly run, high-crime Democrat states, money that is in no way related to COVID. We made a very generous offer of $1.6 trillion, and as usual, she's not negotiating in good faith. I am rejecting their request and looking to the future of our country. I have instructed my representatives to stop negotiating until after the election, when immediately after I win, we will pass a major stimulus bill that focuses on hardworking Americans and small business. And just like that, any lingering hope of a lifeline to millions of Americans is over, and it's unlikely to return. With the electoral pressure removed, Senate Republicans will be even less likely to want to spend money in what's looking likely to be a lame duck session for President Trump. Under Joe Biden, they'll certainly dig in their heels, and it's completely unclear that Biden really plans to fight for another big stimulus package. So that's pretty much a wrap, folks. Whatever stimulus was provided in the initial CARES Act, that's it. Trump did try to walk it back a bit last night amid a freak out that he was surely having. He floated a clean bill with just stimulus checks, but the damage here is already done. Now, we've covered the economic fallout extensively here and just how heavily this particular recession has fallen on the people who can afford it the least. Fed Chair Jerome Powell actually yesterday warned of tragic consequences if Congress failed to pass a second stimulus. So what exactly does that mean? I spoke briefly yesterday with Washington Post reporter Jeff Stein, who we're going to have on the show later this week, and I asked him who is going to be the hardest hit. He told me without a doubt the unemployed. There are about 26 million Americans who are relying right now on unemployment in order to live, to pay rent, to buy food, to keep the lights on. Delinquent electric and water bills are piling up across the country. Now, the initial CARES Act unemployment plus-up of $600 turned out to be one of the greatest anti-poverty programs of all time. The poverty rate actually fell during the time period of the first stimulus. But that is all over now. And the calamity that we warned about from forcing people onto unemployment insurance rather than keeping them attached to their jobs is now coming into focus. According to the New York Times, every single month, the number of workers who are permanently laid off has grown and grown and grown. As of September, 3.7 million Americans have lost their jobs for good. As you know, every single week, more than 800,000 Americans file for unemployment as businesses, especially those in the service sector, realize that they just will not be able to wait out a pandemic that shows no signs of easing up and with zero help coming from the government. With the original unemployment plus-up over and the limited additional funding that was provided by the Trump executive order coming to an end, these millions of Americans will see a 50% loss of income with devastating consequences for themselves, for their families, and for their communities. On the Reddit thread /unemployment, posters reacted with absolute horror and despair to the news that Trump had pulled the plug on a stimulus deal, ending what little hope they were clinging to. One person wrote, "I read this as I'm laying in an empty room on the floor. Girlfriend moved down a couple days ago and took the furniture. No bed, no job, no money. Food for 2 days. I've lost my will to keep up with this shit." Perhaps the most visible group who'll be immediately impacted by the failure of a deal are the tens of thousands of airline employees who've been furloughed. 32,000 workers from American and United were furloughed after their initial bailout provisions expired. Now, you'll recall the CARES Act stimulus included a provision that funneled money to struggling airlines in exchange for them keeping their workers employed. That worked beautifully, but it ended in September. Pelosi had recently pleaded with airline executives not to fire workers because she thought that they were making some progress. At least that's what she said. I guess it's still possible that a separate airline bill could pass Congress, but we've had no indication on that as of yet. As Josh Barrow pointed out, the loss of thousands of airline jobs is not only a human being issue, but a major political issue as well, because major airlines are based in Dallas, Atlanta, and Phoenix, with major hub operations in Detroit, Minneapolis, Houston, Dallas again, Miami, Philadelphia, all key swing states, obviously. But the real toll, of course, is the human toll. Here's how one devastated flight attendant said farewell.
Before we go our separate ways this evening, I'd like to leave you with a few words. As all of you know, the airline industry has been impacted greatly by this global pandemic. Our routes and flight have been significantly reduced, forget seeing your faces today. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for the kindness shown on today's flight.
In addition to these workers, there'll be no more money for schools to help them reopen safely so that our kids can go back. The heartbreaking toll that these lost days and months have had on our most vulnerable children will never be reclaimed. In addition, state and local governments are going to struggle with budget cuts and layoffs. For a preview, you can go to New York City, where they've contemplated sending in the National Guard to clear the trash that has piled up since garbage removal has been cut back due to budget constraints. There will be no help for restaurants and other small businesses who have been decimated in this crisis. Surveys suggest that around 40% of restaurants are going to have to close their doors permanently. And keep in mind, people don't go into the restaurant business because it's the easiest way to make money. They open a restaurant as a passion, as a labor of love. They put their heart and their soul into it, and they enrich their communities in the process. Those closures represent hundreds of thousands of American dreams up in smoke like it's nothing. I will never forgive Trump for abandoning Americans right now. He was the only person who solely held in his hands the power to get this done. I don't want to let Pelosi off the hook here either. She decided for electoral gain she would rather Americans have nothing than give Trump any kind of a win. Now, she's probably correct politically, but it is an unconscionable and frankly psychopathic position. Trump's position is both politically idiotic and psychopathically cruel. The bottom line of this recession, which has ultimately dictated the lack of response, is that no one in this town actually gives a shit about the people who were most impacted. This was the most unequal recession of all time, devastating the bottom half of the country and leaving unscathed or even benefiting the top echelons of society. If ever you wondered how much the people here actually care about you, you now know in absolutely no uncertain terms. They don't. And Sagar, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, it is.
This crisis has been invisible to the people in this town. Hasn't come to their social circles, hasn't come to them, hasn't come to their neighborhoods, hasn't come to the stock market. And so they feel free to play with people's lives like it's a game of chess.
Yeah, that the Pelosi thing is, look, I mean, there was an argument to be made about playing chicken and all that back in March. That's different. Like, now it's October 7th. People have been suffering now for 7 months. 30 million continue to be unemployed. Permanent job loss is exploding. That airline worker, I mean, there are many thousands and thousands and thousands of her all across this country. It's like you said, it's not just her. Maybe she has kids. Maybe she has a husband. Maybe she has somebody that they support. Maybe he's laid off too. We don't know. And that's the thing. It cascades throughout all these different communities. And when you don't do anything for them, and when Trump basically pulled out, I mean, I was starting to think about the Great Depression. And I remember that it used to be that presidents didn't get inaugurated until March. And so Hoover was actually voted out of office in November. And even though he was rejected, he refused to do anything. And same with the Republican Congress. So that winter, 1932 to 1933, one of the worst economic winters in history. Wow. People didn't have gas. They couldn't pay utility bills. A lot of people starved. A lot of people suffered needlessly. Right? That's kind of how I feel it right now. It's like, what's happening? They're just going to burn. The country's going to burn. October to when? Maybe January? You think Joe Biden's going to pass a massive stimulus?
Oh, remember the pantry's bare. Remember that
so
line?
It's like, I'm like, I don't know. There's nobody coming. And that's the part that depresses me the most.
And it's so much of it is because the population that's impacted at all, because it's so unequal, and the people at the top are like doing fine, some doing better than ever. That is the big reason why nothing has gotten done. It is completely revealed who people in this town actually serve. Jeff Stein tweeted out this morning he's always monitoring the our unemployment subreddit over on Reddit. The top post on our unemployment was suicide prevention hotlines.
Yeah.
That's where people are struggling. I mean, the psychic blow to you when you lose your job, when you lose your livelihood, when you don't know how you're going to keep anything together. And then to add on top of that, like obviously the stress of lockdown and the stress of everything that's going on in this country and the realization that people here, they just don't care. They just don't care. And so look, we've been skeptical for a while that any kind of a second stimulus was going to get done. Frankly, we've been skeptical since the first stimulus got passed that they would ever do anything else, because business got what they wanted in the first stimulus. And so there was going to be little pressure to do anything more. I mean, we saw that coming from the very beginning. But there was this tiny sliver of maybe a little bit of hope left, and then President Trump, with that tweet, just completely obliterated. And you can see he was panicked last night. Somebody must have gotten in his ear and talked some sense into him, but he just blew it big time. And I'm sure he probably cared about the fact, you know what it really probably was, the stock market actually dropped.
Yeah, it dropped like a rock. Yeah.
Upon his tweet, that's probably what actually got to him. He sort of panicked last night, was trying to float some ideas, but it's all over.
Yeah, probably. All right.
Next on Rising, friend of the show, Glenn Greenwald, is going to discuss Democrats' sudden concern for President Trump as he battles COVID. That when Rising returns.